that. I don't know what happened. Anyway, you can hear me now, which is all that matters. So welcome indeed to Knitter Matters. I'm Cheryl Lampard. I'm an image consultant. My company is Style Matters International. And throughout my life, I've had two passions, sewing and knitting. And knitting in particular is the thing that I do every day. It's my therapy and I just love it. I love the feel of the yarn through my hands. It's wonderful. And I know you do too. Anyway, I used to also be the proud owner of a yarn store in Brighton, and one of the great joys of that is teaching people how to knit. And it's a great joy now, all these decades later, to still be teaching people to knit via this wonderful medium of social media. Now, I'm going to move the camera now, so look away if this bit makes you dizzy. I will try and say hello when names appear. Forgive me as I miss you. I can't always see. Oh, Carly's saying the mic isn't working, but you can hear me. Well, as long as you can hear me, I will try and fix that for next week, because I really don't know what was going on there. Anyway, I've sorted out my studio again because it was difficult getting the camera in the right place over the other side. And my friend Lisa said, well, why don't you just switch to this side? So I figured I'd try that and see how that works. Let me just see what you can see. As long as you can see, yeah, I think you can see. Okay, all right, good. I'm just not seeing your comments coming up at the moment. So if you do want to say anything or ask me anything, please do. And if I can't answer it as we go along, then I promise to do that afterwards, as soon as possible afterwards. Sorry, I'm getting myself in stereo again. Right, so today is all about blocking. Now in season 9, season 2, season 9, we're not there yet. Season 1, oh gosh, start again, Cheryl. In season 1, episode 9, I demonstrated how to block this particular sample. If you want to see how I actually did that, then you can check back on that. It's season 1, episode 9, where I actually spray blocked it. Anyway, today I want to talk a bit more about what blocking is. I wanted to delve a bit deeper about what blocking is, why we do it, and when it should be done. Now, I belong to several knitting forums on social media and otherwise, and always when the subject of blocking comes up, there are differing views and opinions about blocking. So even amongst the most experienced knitters, there appears to be, there seems to be different opinions, and that's just fine. But before we get into that, let's talk about what blocking actually is. So blocking is the process of using water, steam, pressing to give a finished knitted piece its shape and size, as well as evening out irregularities in the knitting. Now, blocking is nearly always done before the pieces are sewn together, unless it's a circular garment like this is, or an accessory that is knit in the round, so you can't block it flat. This particular cow, I ended up blocking this not flat. I shaped some bubble wrap and then wrapped several towels around it, so it was like a sort of a bit of a mountain without a top on it because of this slightly bowing out shape. It's larger at the bottom and narrower at the top. So to keep that shape, I did that, and obviously I didn't want to flatten it. But it's nearly always done before the pieces are sewn up. And I actually don't even weave in the ends of my knitting until I've blocked it, because if I weave them in a piece that clearly needs blocking and then I've blocked it, if I weave them in first, once I've blocked it, it's going to change the shape and size of the piece. So it might be that my woven in end is sort of peeking out somewhere, or it might be a little bit too tight. So then I've given myself another job by having to unpick that and do that again. So I tend to leave the ends until after I've blocked. So what do you need for blocking? Let's look at some of the things that we might need. Now, I do a lot of blocking. So I have these blocking boards. I love them. They interlock together like a jigsaw puzzle. These have a slightly sort of almost like a carpety top. And I like them because they tend to grip, either if I'm putting a cloth over the top or the knitting itself, they grip. You can get the same type of interlocking boards in with a grid, in sort of inch grids, like a bit like you know, those dressmaking boards. Those can be very helpful indeed for guiding you for where your lines are or your measurements. What I do instead of that, I use this as a cloth, this, and so my blocking boards, and then I would put that over my cloth and line up my thing to be blocked. So, you know, if I know I've got a straight line, for example, if I know I need to have it straight against the line, it's going to give me a guide. Okay. Now, I would still have a ruler and measurements to do that with, but at least I know it's going to help me a bit there. So if you don't have blocking boards, and if you don't do a lot of blocking, or the knitting that you do doesn't need it, then you don't have to invest in them. So if you don't have these, you don't need any other fancy equipment. If you've got a table, a kitchen countertop, cover it with a towel or two. That will do. I used to do that before I bought my blocking boards. I used to have a sort of a board over the bed in the guest room, and then put layers of towels over it and use that. Works perfectly well. Except you've got to put it all away, whereas the blocking boards are really handy. They store easily. Anyway, it's perfectly doable if you've got a table, a kitchen countertop, or even an ironing board, although they tend to be a bit narrow. A spray, you want a spray bottle at some point, probably a steam iron and or a steamer, some water and a bowl. Now that sounds like a long list. It really isn't. They're things that you probably have in the house anyway, and you don't necessarily need all those things for every item being blocked. It's just a general list for when you do need them. The other thing I would suggest that you get are these T-pins. These are stainless steel T-pins, and I really like them. They are much sturdier than dressmaker pins or quarters pins, because those will bend. These will not. They're sturdy. And just one tip, although we're not actually blocking stuff out today, when you do pin things in, and again you can see that in that episode I talked about, season 1 episode 9, don't put your pins in that way straight up. Don't put them in straight up. You want to put them at an angle. It makes it much easier, especially if you're doing any steam pressing, and it makes it easier if you need to get a measure, a ruler, to, you know, get that inside and measure properly. So it helps you if you just put the pins in at an angle like that. Anyway, these T-pins are readily available. They're inexpensive and they'll last you a long time. Okay, another thing that you might want, it's not essential, another thing you might want is lace wires. Now, these are a bit long, so forgive me, I'm going to have to sort of maneuver them. These are actually quite long, and they need to be, because what you're doing, if I can show you just briefly on this example, on this shawl, when I block this shawl out, I've got long lengths of straight lines, and it's a basic sort of triangular shape. And what I needed to do here, these lace wires, you insert them sort of along a straight edge. You would insert them like this, going along the edge. They're great for scarves too, or runners, anything that's got long straight edges. And you just keep going. When I blocked this triangular shawl out, it looked like something from a science project, because it's such a big triangle. I had them going, you know, 3 different directions and had to measure them all out. But that is really helpful. Blocking wires I find very helpful for lace and sort of shawls, scarves, anything like that. And then you would use your pins, once you've got your measurements right, you would use your pins to sort of pin them in like that. So you're using the blocking wires as a guide, and then steadying the, I can't pin into this table, but you get the idea. You can also get those sort of comb-like pins, they're like it's almost like a little comb, and it's got several blocking pins along the way, and then you would sort of stab those in, you know, every so often. I don't have any of those to hand, but whatever works for you. But that's how you would use lace wires, and I've got a set of these in a tube. These are 2.5 foot long, I think, and I've got some other slightly shorter ones. But that's how you use lace wires. Very useful if you do shawls and things with straight sides. If you don't do much of that, then they're probably not necessary for you. So, okay, you can also get special made forms for blocking things like gloves and socks. To be honest, I've never found that I've needed those. You know, I do quite like looking for vintage blockers, sock blockers, but you know, more for decorative effect and for collectibles than anything else. Okay, but yeah, if you do a lot of socks and you find you know, sock blockers useful, then by all means use them. If you're making beret shaped hats, you know, and tams knitted in the round, to block those out you can use something like a plate. You don't have to have lots of fancy equipment. So before we even attempt any blocking, and as I said, we're not really doing much blocking today, I just want to delve deeper into it, and then possibly next week I'll show you some different ways of doing the blocking. But you must consider the fibre. There's a few things you need to think about. What's the fibre? Can it endure the heat, the steam of blocking, the blocking process itself? And the first thing you do is look at the ball band. So for example, now I will say, you're looking at the ball band for the care instruction. It's not going to tell you how to block it, but knowing the fibre is very important. So this one, for example, is merino wool and nylon. This is a sock yarn. It's meant to be, it's designed with socks in mind, so it's hard wearing. It is machine washable. So if you know that, that's really useful, because clearly you would be able to machine wash it. But that means also that you can wet block this. You're not going to have a problem with it. If it can go in the machine, you can certainly wet block it. This one is, let's see, this is baby alpaca. Now, I would be very careful with that. I would really want to take extra care with that. Alpaca tends not to spring back so well. So this says hand wash only and dry flat, but I can wet it. I know that, that's good. So again, I would just need to be careful with what I use for that and the method of doing it. This yarn, this is a mixture of alpaca, merino wool and mulberry silk. And again, the washing instructions, best results, hand wash at low temperature with a mild detergent. I will talk about the detergents, or well, we're not using detergents to block it necessarily, but I will talk a bit more about that next time when I actually do some blocking. But as a quick tip, if it's a natural fibre, and to be honest, even if it's not a natural fibre, it's hair, it's animal hair. So you can use a mild shampoo. If you can use something on your own hair, you can use it on animal hair. But do a mild version. You don't want anything that's, you know, a coloured shampoo or anything like that. Use a very mild shampoo. I do like things like Eucalan and soak for blocking, because you don't have to rinse those out. And the less you're immersing your garment, your pieces for blocking, the better. But that's if you're actually immersing them. Anyway, so this one, again, I know exactly what to do with that. This is a blend of silk, baby alpaca and merino. And again, gives me very good directions. I can hand wash this, hand wash colours separately in cool water. Again, that's a recurring theme with mild soap. Well, again, I would use one of the products that are sort of designed for wools, and delicate wools at that. Okay, so now I've got a good idea. Oh, mustn't forget this last one, because there's an important thing on this one. This is acrylic, This is 100% acrylic. It is machine washable, okay? You could even tumble dry this. I'm not sure I would do that, but note here it says do not dry clean. It doesn't want you to dry clean, okay? That's actually quite important, and we'll talk a bit more about acrylic a bit later. Okay, so let me move those out the way. So now we know that we've got certain fibers and compositions of fibers that we've got to be careful about, because different things, as I say, these ball bands aren't giving you any instructions for blocking, but it'll tell you how you need to treat the fiber. And this is where your swatches come in handy. And you know, those swatches that you did before you started the project, you know, the gauge swatch that no one wants to do. Well, if you're of a mind that you don't want to swatch, and that has as many opinions as blocking or not, but I'm a great swatcher. I'm a great believer in swatching, because you can do so much more with your swatches than just checking your gauge, as important as that is. This is where you would use your swatches to test how the fabric appears when it's knitted, how it works out, how it behaves, if you will. This is the same fabric that I knitted that shawl in, and this was a swatch that I did just in plain stockinette stitch, and I washed it and I blocked it, and it's really, really nice. I mean, it was already a soft yarn, but it's got a beautiful drape to it. And so that tells me that I could use this for a really nice drapey piece of knitting. Obviously a shawl is a drapey thing, but there's a lot of stitch pattern in that shawl, so it's a bit heavier, but this is super light in stockinette stitch, and it would make a really pretty, very lightweight sweater, perhaps one with a sort of waterfall collar, or I could do something, you know, on the cuffs and make a kind of floppy cuff. So doing a swatch is actually just a lot more useful than checking your gauge. It tells you how the fabric behaves after it's washed. And another thing about swatching, it's especially important if you're using dark and light colors together. Let's say you're making, you know, a Fair Isle thing with a Fair Isle garment or a hat or something, and it's a complicated pattern, and you've got very dark and very light yarns. Now, this is only stripes, I know, but I'm just trying to make the point. And this is acrylic, so it's certainly not going to color bleed. But not every yarn is color fast, and especially those with rich, really deep colors. And it doesn't mean to say there's anything wrong with the yarn. It just means it's the first time it's wet, it's going to release some excess dye. So that happens often with really dark colors and really saturated colors. So what you would want to do then, if you've used light and dark colors together, I would, with your swatch, you would wet it, wrap it tightly around some paper towels and let that dry. If the color has bled onto the paper, then you know you probably, when it comes to cleaning, you would need to dry clean your garment. The chances are it's not going to be an acrylic that's going to bleed. That it's just a different manufacturing process. So although you can't necessarily dry clean an acrylic, certain natural fiber yarns, if they're highly saturated, you certainly can dry clean them. But it's much better to test that out first than after you've spent hours and hours on a beautiful garment and then find that some of the colours have bled. That's heartbreaking. So we've talked about how the fabric behaves. Let's get back to the discussion about whether blocking is necessary. Now, do I block everything? Well, pretty much, yes, but not every single thing. If I'm making children's garments or anything that needs to be washed frequently, I'll make it in an easy care yarn, and I'll wash test the swatch and see how it performs. And sometimes washing is all that's needed. I didn't block this cow because it's a reversible cow and it's got this really nice, interesting sort of bubble design and a sort of slightly more pointy design on this side. And when I wear it, sort of both sides show. Now, the last thing I want to do, having gone to all the trouble of making these kind of bubbles in the fabric, I don't want to flatten them out. And actually, when I took it off the needles, it really didn't need blocking anyway. So there's no point in doing it if it doesn't need it. And even if the fibre is safe to block, if it doesn't need blocking, then don't do it. As far as I'm concerned, less blocking is more. Less blocking is better. So that said, you knew I was going to say that, there's always a but. That said, when something does need blocking, you should take as much care in doing it as in knitting it. So I will say that again. When you do need to block something, take as much care in doing the blocking as in knitting it. It's not a fast, oh, that'll do. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. So let me show you a couple of examples. This is this yarn, and again, you've seen this piece several times in process. I've finally finished the back and the front. I've just got to do, this is the back of a sweater vest. Now, this has got a really nice leafy pattern, and it is in this yarn that I showed you here, which is Alpaca, Merino and Mulberry Silk. Now, I did block this out because it on the needles, it was quite sort of scrunched up. It wasn't terrible. It didn't need a lot of evening out, but I did block it. And it's much, much nicer for it. It really brings out that embossed design. Now, because I'd sort of, I was going to say butchered a couple of patterns. That's not the case. Because I started off with a pattern and then changed it completely differently from the shape of the sweater and the pattern, because this is going to be a sweater vest and I wanted a deep V at the front and I wanted it longer, and instead of sleeves I put in, there's armholes and blah blah blah. When I blocked it, because I didn't have a schematic, or I didn't have the measurements from the pattern because I changed the pattern so much. When you're blocking a garment, you're going to be following the dimensions that your pattern gives you. And if it's got a schematic, so much the better. You've really got a good idea then of all the different measurements. But because I changed it so much, really the schematics in the pattern for this, or the measurement instructions, weren't really that important. So I had to decide what my measurements were going to be based on the gauge that I'd done. And then, because I needed the front to match the back in terms of the silhouette of it, I had to, once it was blocked and dried and I'd taken it off the blocking boards, I had to draw around it on a sheet of pattern paper, very carefully getting the dimensions out, so that when I blocked the front, I had a template for it. So again, that's another thing you can do. But this really blocked out very nicely, and I'm very, very excited to get it completely finished. This shawl, which is finished, sorry, I've got so many bits here. As you can see, I beaded this one in places too, at the front and sides. There's a it's a big triangular thing. This definitely benefits from blocking. Anything lacy is really going to benefit from blocking, because what happens is when you have sort of intricate stitch patterns or lace patterns, on the needle they tend to look a bit scrunched up. But when you block them, it really opens up the design. After all, sort of lace knitting is supposed to be open and airy. And again, you've got this honeybee stitch here. You really want that to show. That's the point of it. And even these sort of side wings, as it were, very simple sort of 2-row stitch pattern, but off the needles it was all scrunched up. Now you can see how it opens up. So lace knitting in particular is something that you do need to block. So let me show you something here. So this is a sample which I talked about earlier. This is the one that I blocked sort of on the Facebook Live before. This is hot off my needles. And as you can see, I haven't even woven my ends because, as I said, I don't do that. So there you can see really clearly the difference. Let me try and swivel that round. You can really see there the difference of the unblocked piece and the blocked piece. Okay. Now I've got a third one here, just to... This one is actually the piece that I blocked also in the episode that I mentioned. So this was the one that was already pinned out. This one was started off looking like this. Then I wet it and blocked it out. Since then, I have not exactly unblocked it, but I've wet it and washed it again because I wanted to see the difference if I did that once it had been blocked. Now, as you can see, it's not as scrunched up as this one, but it's actually not as expanded out. It's certainly not the size of this one either, the fully blocked one. Okay, it's exactly the same number of stitches, the same needle size, exactly the same. It's just been blocked and then washed, if you will. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, the reason I'm showing you this is if this was a sweater, this was a finished sweater, look at the difference of size now. So there's a good, I'm reckoning a good 5/8 inch here, just on this swatch, and it's a bit shorter in length as well. Now imagine that across a sweater. So if I had worn and washed my sweater that had been blocked before I stitched it up, then I'd worn it, washed it. If I don't block it or shape it again, my sweater isn't going to be the shape that it was. It's going to be too small or not as, you know, the shape that I want it to be, not as large as I want it to be maybe. Now, do you have to block it again? Well, in this case, yes, but you won't have to do the same amount of blocking. Because remember, when you first blocked this, you did it in pieces, then you seamed it. Now, you're not going to take apart the sweater, of course you're not going to do that. But what it would benefit from is some reshaping. So any sort of lacy pattern like this, when you're doing your swatch, it's worth having another look at it and seeing how it behaves when you've dried it, when you've blocked it, dried it and re-washed it. Because that's quite a difference. And you expect that difference on your unblocked swatch, but you may have been surprised by that blocked and then washed swatch. So just be aware you may need to reshape that sweater. And most patterns do say, you know, lay flat, or most patterns will tell you to sort of, however you wash it, you know, lay it flat and reshape while damp. So you don't want to hang it up. You don't want to drape it over something where the weight is going to pull it out. You're going to wash it, get most of the water out, roll it in a towel to do that, and then reshape it. So that's really all that needs to happen. And if you have to put a few T-pins in just to pull that out back to shape again, then so be it. But at least then you'll have a sweater that fits you. So we talked about different fibres reacting differently to heat. Now, most natural fibres can be blocked, as we can see. But they do behave differently, as you can see. So cotton, for example, this cotton tends to stretch out when worn. This is a mercerized cotton, so it tends to be a bit more stable and it's got a nice sheen to it. But certain sort of untreated cottons, they tend to, in wear, cottons tend to stretch out in wear and then shrink back to shape a bit when wet. Well, that's fine, but when you're blocking cotton, just be careful not to overstretch it, especially, you know, if it's the finished pieces, because you're going to start off with a sweater that's too big then. So just bear in mind, in wear, they tend to relax a bit. I love sort of slouchy cotton summer sweaters, but they do tend to, as you wear them, they do tend to kind of grow. And it's nice, you think, oh gosh, I've lost weight. But actually, it's the sweater that's grown a bit, possibly. And of course, you may have lost weight as well. But in my case, it's just that the sweater had grown. And then you wash it and it kind of pulls back in again. But the point about that is when you're blocking cotton, just don't overstretch it because you'll start off with something that's too big then. Now, wool, as we've seen, generally blocks very well. But I do want to talk a bit about something called superwash wool. I don't have an example here, But superwash wool, I'm just putting this in the picture because they're wools. Superwash wool, as I say, I don't have an example here, but superwash wool can be tricky. Now, superwash wool is a fantastic thing, and it's great for children's items and those items that need to be frequently washed. It's wool, but it's been treated so as to be machine washable so that it doesn't felt under heat and agitation. So, just the science bit here. If you look at a fibre of wool under a microscope, it looks very much like human hair in that it has scales. And what happens is when it's wet and subjected to especially heat as well, those scales sort of raise themselves and they lock onto each other so that it's what we call sort of sticky wool. Untreated wool is sort of sticky wool. Untreated wool, the scales lift, they lock onto each other, and that's the felting process beginning to start. So the more you agitate it and the more you heat it, those scales all lock together, and that's how you end up getting a felted fabric. I mean, I'm simplifying, obviously. Now, you don't want, that's the main problem with wool, that you have to treat it very gently, which is why, you know, if you've got lots of children or their clothes are constantly in the wash, you can't be sort of hand washing everything and laying it out. You want to be able to throw it in the machine. I understand that completely. So superwash wool was created, and what they do, they use a chemical process. It's been treated so it removes the scales on the wool strands. So that's great, and it's very smooth to the touch. It's lovely, and you actually get great stitch definition with superwash wool. But the downside of that is that it tends to grow when it's blocked, because those scales aren't locking together. There's nothing to kind of hold it. So it tends to grow. So what I'm saying is that if you're going to knit something in superwash wool, you want to do a decent size swatch for whatever it is you're going to knit. Don't do sort of just a little one. Do a fair size swatch, and know the dimensions that you want it to be before you start, and then measure it against those, because you might find it comes out significantly bigger. I had a really nice, when I had the shop, I had a beautiful sweater in superwash wool, and it looked amazing, but the first time I washed it, it really did grow on that. So yeah, I hadn't blocked it, of course. So that was a good lesson to me. Anyway, so that's superwash wool. Now acrylics, let me show you this. Acrylics. It's hard to actually drastically change the shape of acrylic knitting just by blocking it. It's just the nature of the fabric. You're really just aiming to smooth things out for seaming. Now, this, I hope you can see this. This is, again, the same swatch, in the sense it's the same amount of stitches, same length. It's got a cable pattern in the middle there. This is straight off the needles. This I blocked. Now, I blocked this quite seriously, which you don't do with acrylics, but I wanted to make a point. Acrylics, as I said, you don't really drastically change the shape of acrylic knitting by blocking. You've got a cable in this, so it tends to be nice and springy. And if I'd blocked this the way I should have done, which is usually by wet blocking by spraying it rather than immersing it, doesn't usually need to be immersed, but do follow your ball band instructions. But I haven't blocked this one yet. It's straight off the needles. But if I were to block this, I would do it just by spraying from my spray bottle and pinning it out. Now, the point I was trying to make with this, I overblocked this. If I really had overblocked it, I would have used a iron. And some blocking you can do with a steam iron, but you never want to do that with acrylics, because what happens, and it hasn't happened here with the heat, but I've seriously overblocked this, and you can see how here where you get these nice springy cables, and sorry, I know I've done it in a mottled yarn, so it's a bit hard to see, but you can see there's texture there. There's a nice spring to it. On this one, I've blocked it sort of within an inch of its life, and it's completely flat. There's got no texture at all there, which is such a shame when you're doing cables. You want that spring. But if I had seriously overblocked this, and especially using heat, something happens to acrylic. If you overblock acrylic, you kill it. And what that means is killing acrylic means that the yarn has melted enough to lose some of the elasticity. It hasn't sort of dribbled in melting, and it's not going to be a sticky mess, but it's actually heated it up enough that the yarn has lost that elasticity. And once that occurs, you can't undo it. You can't unblock it. You can't get it back. So really be careful with acrylics. You know, less is more, certainly with acrylics, and gently, because once you kill it, you can't change it. You'll never be able to get it back to how it in its former state. Just two other things, or one other thing. Novelty yarns and metallics shouldn't be blocked at all. This is a novelty yarn. It's like a sort of faux fur. This actually, the label of this, which has fallen off, it did say dry clean. Okay, so I haven't knitted with this yet, but I know it makes a really nice sort of faux fur texture. But clearly, blocking that, you'd ruin it. You know, you're not going to do that. And this sort of novelty yarn with all its lovely texture, yeah, I'm not going to want to block that either, because I'm just going to ruin all the texture of it. And that's the beauty of that type of yarn. Okay. Well, I think it might be useful if I wrote up and put a list of fibres and the method for blocking them on the Knit and Matters page for you, because there is a lot of information that I want to give you. And I just wanted to give you, really, to answer the questions, why do we block? Do we need to block? And the answer, as you can see, is yes and no. But if it's a yes, then that's why what I've gone through today and explaining is the difference that the blocking will make and why we do it, and the exceptions to that. And again, if it doesn't need to be blocked, then there's no need to do it. So as I say, during the week I will write up and put a list of fibres and the method for blocking them as a guide on the Knit and Matters page for you. So I hope that gave you a better understanding of blocking and why it's done. I think in the next episode we'll do a part 2, and I'll actually demonstrate some blocking methods. So, okay, let me just move this back up. And thank you again for bearing with me with the sound issue. Not sure why that happened. Tested the mic before we started. And I tested it again when I started again. But anyway, it didn't work, so my bad, and I'm sorry. But thank you for your patience. So, on the subject of next episode, I need to tell you that Knit and Matters will be taking a break for a couple of weeks. I will try and do it next week, as I said, and show you different ways of blocking. But I am moving to Pennsylvania permanently from Florida, and that is occurring in mid-October. So the next few weeks are going to be quite busy, and of course my whole studio is going to be packed up. So I am very excited about it, but it's just a bit of disruption to Knit and Matters. But please bear with us, and I will put updates in terms of the next episode and what's happening and when it will be on the Knit and Matters page. So if you follow that, you'll get those updates, and if you're not following us, please do. So as always, this episode and all others can be found on the Knit and Matters page, although I think it's easier to watch them on YouTube. The channel obviously is Knit and Matters. You can find all the episodes there in the playlist, and this one will be uploaded shortly afterwards too, in the next day or so. And if you do want to watch this again, it's episode 2. I've done it again. It's season 2, episode 27. Season 2, episode 27. So thank you so much again for watching and for being so patient with me. I do appreciate it. So until next time, stay well, stay safe, and stay knitting. Bye for now.